Hi, welcome to D10tion, where we pretend to know what we're talking about when it comes to D&D. I am your host, Tristan. Press start. To my right, we have player number 1, Nancy. To my left, we have player number 2, Chris. This is a very different episode because today I am not joined by Brandon or Sam. I, in fact, have our 2 new players in the Bards and Nobles campaign, and today we're going to talk about, well, new player perspective, because in the grand schemes of everything, you guys are new.
Yeah.
We all are new in comparison to people like Brandon who have been playing for more than 20 years. I know I only have a couple of years under the belt, but you guys have more or less a couple of months under your belts. And I know, for example, Chris, you've played in at least 2 different campaigns with us. One
That's
on
right.
stream as well as off stream, as well as in a couple of the one-shots. You have done a couple of episodes, Nancy, as far as joining an episode, as well as you've joined this campaign. And you've watched us a lot. As people know, Nancy has done all the artwork that we have for the ads and stuff like that. She's a wonderful artist. Chris is as well, but he hasn't done too much as far as artwork for us yet.
Not yet.
Get your game on.
So I know, Nancy, you've been observing more than you have played so far, and that's going to change as you continue in the campaign. And Chris, as you're just building up your catalog. So what we're going to do today is kind of just get a brief introduction to your perspective as new players, and because of that, we're going to kind of just start with how you even heard about D&D in general. And because I am a gentleman, ladies go first. Chris, no.
Age before baby.
There we go. Yeah.
Golly.
That's true. You are the baby of the group.
Yes.
So no, but let's start with Nancy. So what was the first time that you can recall even hearing about Dungeons and Dragons?
So Brandon was my coworker. So when I first met him, he didn't come across. Well, I mean, he came across as a person.
He wasn't a person at all.
He came across as a person who does do gaming, or I wouldn't say a nerd, but he did come across like that.
And then you talked to him,
And then when we had gone into a full-on conversation, he had mentioned D&D. I was at a complete loss because I never heard of it.
Okay, so Brandon talking to you, because that was only about a year or 2? I don't know how long you guys have
At the
actually
beginning of this year, I think it was.
So less than a year, Brandon just brings up Dungeons and Dragons, and you're like, "What's that?"
Yeah, he starts bringing it up, and I'm like, I don't know of it. I just think of actual Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought it was like a computer game, not an actual tabletop thing you can sit around and interact with. So when he had gotten, I was still confused. He kept explaining, and I'm like, I'm a visual person. I need to see it happen.
Right, and if you haven't seen a game of D&D, it's hard to picture exactly what's going on when someone tries to explain it to you. Like, even just the other day at my day job, someone had brought it up. When we were talking about D&D, and they're like, that sounds really involved, just from passively listening. And they're not wrong. And so I think, being a visual person, because I'm very much the same way, until you see it, you don't quite grasp the concept.
That's right.
So what about you, Chris? What was the first time you recall even hearing about D&D?
It's a good question. So I don't think anyone can deny at this point that Dungeons and Dragons has, come to a place of resurgence in culture at large.
Absolutely.
We see from the opening scene of Stranger Things in season 1, and you're just all of a sudden just enthralled in this amazing battle with miniatures, and they're telling this story about this battle, and there's monsters and there's wizards and spells and stuff. So it's all very it's so action packed, right? And so I think it's definitely, I would say, re-permeated
In
our
your
culture.
mind.
And so therefore, I knew about it. I always knew about it to some degree.
Yeah, because as we've discussed before, D&D is something that's in so much pop culture, even in passing. There is the stereotype of the 30-year-old man living in his mom's basement playing D&D with his friends. And so you'll see that in all kinds of movies. There's references in other video games of people doing it. TV shows galore. So you hear about it, I think, and it's sometimes like maybe you don't even notice what you're even seeing. Like you may have seen something in a show where they're playing D&D, but it doesn't process because you don't know what it is until, like you said, you see what it is on purpose, more or less.
The only way I could really identify it was it's role playing. You get into a character, so I can act like I'm some sorceress, like I am now. I can be a sorceress and I can throw spells versus. Versus just doing it in a game and the character's already there.
Right.
So it's more using your imagination versus seeing it actually happen already in a game itself.
Right. And I think the best introduction to it is not like even just watching a group play, because you both have done it where you've watched people like us play. Not until you actually get your foot in the door and sit down for that first session, I think, do you not truly understand how much you're putting into this, how much you're getting out of it, and how competitive it can be, and how just involved it is. And it's a term that always comes up, is how involved you are in something like that. So I'm trying to think of the first time you guys had both played. Yours was the Almighty 5 one-shot, correct? Where you played Sarkikos. And I believe your first time actually playing was in Bards and Nobles as a character who was more or less a throwaway character. You played a Aasimar Bard?
Wow.
I believe you're the one encased in the crystal.
Yeah, that was the first one I played in. It was like a one shot for my character.
Yes,
basically.
It was a one shot for your character, and it was part of our overarching Bards and Nobles campaign. So I guess do you remember how you felt after that first time playing? Either one of you.
So I didn't. I mean, I liked it because it was just, I was in and out without having to, because at the moment I wasn't thinking of doing this more full-term thing. I could come in and use my character, interact with the character and others as well, and still get the whole feel of it. And I liked the feel of it because at that moment there's no judgment at that point.
Right, it was less of a commitment.
Be a character without being a hypocrite.
Yeah, that's good.
And at the moment you're like completely into the whole storyline. I was just sad my character had to die.
Yes. So if you go back into some of the older archives of Bards and Nobles, or even Roll for Bluff, you'll see that Nancy did play a character whose character did die in the end for a good cause. And that's a very different experience, because this is where I think when it comes to player death, especially coming in as a new person, you weren't coming in like with an involved character that you were devoted to. It was just Brandon handed you a sheet and was like, you're this character now, and you're like, cool, we'll see what happens at the end of this. Whereas like with the Almighty 5 one shot for you, Chris, you went in there with the ultimate goal of winning,
right?
And I think it was a different driving force. So I can imagine maybe you came in, Nancy, a little bit more nonchalant, like, let me just see how this thing is going, whereas you might have come in with a little bit more of the competitive nature of succeed, just because of the different entrances to that. And there's something to be said about both of them, because if you're a new player, maybe you want to just test the waters a bit like you did, Nancy, and just kind of like, I don't want to commit too hard, maybe just a character, like a throwaway character, and just have a good time, or something like a one-shot where you're part of that team to get that ultimate goal and that big battle, and if your character dies, it's like, oh, that sucks, but there's no real like hurt in the end, because like you'll see with other ones, when you have characters die in like campaigns that you've been playing for years and your character dies, it's heartbreaking because you've committed to that character versus one that you've played for 2 hours, like, I'm dead, oh well, let's move on. So did you guys so Chris, how did you feel going into that with your because granted you came in as a very good character, Nancy, you came in as a Aasimar holy demon slayer, versus Chris, you came in as an Ettercap, essentially a giant spider person, in an evil campaign where we were to essentially assassinate a team of heroes.
That's right. Going into it, I mean, there was I would say I was actually, as much as I tried to get prepared on the front end, I ended up kind of like throwing out like all my plans, because as we've talked about, when even formulating the character, I was like, oh, I didn't know Ettercaps weren't a
Playable
playable
race.
race. I didn't know also that I was going to be part of a group of bad guys. I thought I was going to be the singular bad guy. So
Right, and that was where there was a little bit of breakdown of communication. Then I take it because I had asked you how would you feel about playing a bad guy, and you took that as you were to be the bad guy. And so
true.
some of it came down, and this is where D&D, of course, it comes down to a lot with communication. But then, luckily when we have DMs, because the DM for that session was Sam.
Yep.
And Sam was very accommodating. We homebrewed because you had done your own. You done a ton of your own research as far as things that happen in D&D, and you had made your own thing.
Yeah.
And Sam was like, "Well, let's make it happen as best as possible."
But that being said, of course, once you sit down at that table, and once the story gets going, it's so much fun, and there's such a sense of newness and just endless possibilities.
Right.
So much potential.
So, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into this question that almost probably needs to go without asking. When you both were done with your first sessions, did you want to play again?
Yes, because again, it's the gist of it basically is a fantasy world.
Yes.
I can interact with it as a character, fictional as it may be.
Mm.
I can interact with it, and whatever happens does not affect my own actual reality.
Right. D&D exists in its own little bubble.
Yeah, so I can come here. It's a weird way to say it, but I can play in the bubble, and as soon as I leave, I at least feel good and refreshed because I had nothing to do with reality at that
Right. It's definitely a great break from that reality because, again, you are playing that different character. Mm-hmm. Now, I know from your background, Chris, especially because for those of you who don't know, Chris and I have been friends since kindergarten. So we've been friends for about 25 years at this point. And so over the years, Chris and I have done theater. We've done short films. We've done acting. We've done writing. We've done tons of stories. So characters are things that you and I have done extensively to the point where we still do it today. So I know for someone like me, the character aspect, like you said, the break of reality, Nancy, being that character, especially when you have things like one-shots and maybe throwaway characters, that excitement of being someone different, whether it's a consistent basis in developing a character over time, is such a draw for people. Like I know for me personally, and I think to some degree you, because again you are a story person, because you're predominantly at this point a writer. At least from what I know. Not that I say, because you still constantly draw as well, but you're constantly trying to tell a story with everything you do. So I imagine for you, this is one of the reasons why I even talked to you in the first place about joining us, was because I knew that was something that would draw you in.
Yep.
So, and I mean, clearly you said, you come in and then by the end of it, you're like, I want more.
That's true. But I definitely had a lot of trepidation about even the idea of joining an ongoing campaign.
Right.
A one-shot versus an ongoing campaign couldn't be more different.
And that's a valid point. And we're in a unique situation with Barnes & Nobles. We are playing a weekly streamed show. And that is a lot of commitment. This is where you see all the memes and the jokes about D&D being the hardest thing to do about D&D is getting the group together to play. And so that's why you'll see some people that they'll try to play once a week, it may be once a month, and that's a little bit less of an overwhelming thing for people, whereas we are playing once a week, same time, same day, consistently. And I know that was your reservations to begin with, because that's a lot of commitment to a lot of people. Yes. And we're in that unique situation, which is why things like one-shots and stuff like that are a beautiful thing to bring people in on. And this is where I know it will be interesting, because you've done a couple of one-shots. I'd love to get Nancy, you into more one-shot. Now that you're part of the Roll Call family, as a full player, I'd love to see you get into other one-shots as we will do them, just to see you play different characters.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the biggest things I know for me, and I've seen Chris do it as well. Because again, we are very much the theatrical people. We find a character and we dive into it.
Yep.
Sarkikos was very, Sarkikos, I am here to murder and all the things on earth. And then you get Solomon comes like, hey man, Solomon, I'm here for Baylor, I'm the cleric. And so it'll be interesting to see, because you had a little bit with it with your bard, was very much, soft spoken as far as kind, but worried about demons that were in your home. And then you have Morena, who was essentially a slave who has recently been freed, and now she's just like, freedom!
And I noticed that was my first thing when I was creating the character. As a new player, the first thing I wanted to do is get a character that's kind of similar to me, because that's as easy as it can get.
Yes.
Something that's just like me, that I won't have trouble of, well, would I do this or would I not? And then that's more easier.
Yes.
And then the other day when I was talking with Brandon, I don't remember if it was Brandon or you. I remember I can come in as a guy. I can change my
You
character.
can do that.
You can.
I can be an angel, a demon, a lizard, a fish, perhaps.
Yes.
And I completely forgot about that. I just thought, well, the
And
character closest to me.
That
I
is an
guess.
exciting feature about D&D, is that you could be a guy, you could be a girl, you could be a different entity altogether. But I think everyone's first instinct for the most part is to pick a character that's fairly close to who they are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because that's what I did with Bards Nobles. I picked a Goliath barbarian who worships Thor, and if people know me, that's pretty much me. So and especially personality wise, because I know for me personally, going into it, you go into it with a mindset of like how you're going to play that character. You're like, I'm pretty sure I know how they're going to react. And then you start playing and you realize that's not what I told myself I was going to do. Because I went in with the intention of coming in and having Sorn be that like stereotypical barbarian. He was going to be the big guy who fought and had Viking aspect to it. And then as I started playing, he ended up being like Thor from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was this big friendly dude. And it was like, that isn't what I thought. But it's because it matched my personality enough that, much like you, it's easier for me to play. Which is why for other characters, I might need to push that boundary a bit sometimes, or try to twist it just a bit. What about you, Chris? As far as like, because your first character as the thing was Sarkikos, which is not you at all. So I guess as your first time playing, how did you feel about coming in and playing a character drastically different from yourself?
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a challenge, and this could almost be another episode in itself. But
you're right.
There's something to be said about the difference between a combat heavy one shot versus a role playing heavy one shot.
Absolutely.
And while I was more intrigued and perhaps more inclined toward the role playing side, the story was such that it was like, oh, we gotta fight.
Yeah, you did come in during the combat
a lot of time
version.
fighting, and
Right.
And so and it's funny because if I was to like just base my Dungeons and Dragons experience on that first one shot, I probably honestly wouldn't have come back, because that stream was 6 hours.
Yeah, that you did come into a very battle heavy, very lengthy session, because we were trying to keep that one shot into 2 sessions, but it was one of those things. If we had made it 3, it just would have been like an hour worth of session.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I definitely understand, because we talk about it before in the episode like why D&D and stuff like that, where Sam and I's experience, even Hannah's first experience with D&D, were not positive, and it almost put us off of it completely.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that point of view, because it's tough. Yeah, it really depends on if you prefer combat, if you're okay with sitting down for 4 hours at a time and playing. I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of people, is that they don't realize that the sessions are so long. So how did you guys feel about that kind of thing, as far as the length of the sessions?
So sometimes, it really depends on what the storyline is. Sometimes the session seems longer than the normal 3 hours. Most times I felt like it was only 1 hour. Like, really?
Where'd the time go?
Because you're so into it.
Right.
And so it's not, the only reason why I'm conscious of the time is because reality beckons you and calls, we've got work to do. All right. But it's not that it's too long, it's too short. It's just, of course, like in real life, like if I'm reading a book, sometimes I can read it for 6 hours on end, and I'm like, oh no, I've lost out on a lot of things.
Right.
Versus, oh, it's only been 2 minutes.
Yes, and that is the down, because especially with D&D, it's such a story. There are going to be slow parts of a story. There are going to be quick parts of a story, and that really can really change the length that it feels like. And there is something to be said, like time flies when you're having fun. If you're you're having an intense battle, and you're like everyone's focused on that board, and they're like, we're gonna and then all of a sudden you're like, boom, it's been 3 hours. Like, we've been fighting for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing this like slow, methodical like dungeon crawl, it might feel like forever because you're spending everything like, all right, I checked for traps on this door. Door's not even locked. All right, there's another door in front of you. Son of a, come on, it's a door. Just take us where we need to be. So, I mean, I guess as players, as you come into this, how do you feel about that ebb and flow of the slow? Do you feel that for the most part with D&D that there should be those like? Should everything be quick pace, slow pace, or should everything have that good, wave?
Well, I think it should have a good wave because, like any good story plot, it's supposed to go at a level pace and then bring you to
That's right.
what's going to happen, and then from there on, it depends on who's telling the story on how you perceive the ending, or, well, it didn't meet my expectation versus that was perfect.
Right.
So I don't think the storyline is terrible. I think Brandon's doing a great job on it.
Yeah.
I know I couldn't do it.
If you're watching.
DMing is such a challenge, and I think I agree with you guys. You do need the parts that are quick pace. You do need the ones to slow down to kind of bring your thoughts in, or just to like pace things. Because I know personally for me, if everything were so fast paced, I would burn out so fast because then you don't have time to think, you don't have time to connect.
It's what keeps it level.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess then a question of as far as how you play, we usually say that there's about 3 different ways of playing. There's the RP heavy, the combat heavy, and then the middle ground. As you guys have been playing, have you guys figured out what you feel that you are currently as a player out of those 3?
Yeah, as I said before, I'm my personality is such that I am definitely more inclined, and I lean into RP heavy, especially finding myself as a cleric and a spellcaster. It's very challenging to me, to just see a list of spells and actions and stuff, like all these things I can do, but I'm not the best strategist. But I love being Solomon. I love walking around. I love interacting with characters. I love kind of like making mistakes as the character too.
And I'm with you in a lot of the ways, because as far as combat goes, on many of these episodes of D10tion, I've said it time and time again, I'm not a spellcaster. I am bad at spells. Like, if you were to give me a spellcaster, as much as I'd want to try some of them, that list is daunting.
That's
especially if you can prepare your spells so you have access to all the spells. Which is why I've started small with, like, we have a Christmas one-shot we've done where I've played in Eldritch Knights, but I'm still primarily a fighter with a couple of spells. In Mythos and Mayhem, another campaign you're part of that Sam DMs in our free time, I play a paladin. I'm still predominantly a hitter with spells.
Yeah.
So I kind of sit in that middle ground where I'm an RPer and a combat person. How about you, Nancy? Have you found where you might be leaning to? Because you guys are again very new, and you could switch at any point in time.
Yeah, so I feel like with my character, I'm more on the middle ground, and me as a person itself, I'm more on the middle ground, especially since I still feel like I'm new to this, even though I've done a couple of sessions. Because I'm looking at that list exactly like he is. I'm like,
you guys chose because you chose a cleric and you chose a sorcerer.
And I was trying to avoid that, but at the same time, I was like, well, it would be interesting. But I know for a dead fact, it's difficult for me to be. I know after we go through a battle, I was like, I could have used that one.
and that's one of those haunting things about spellcasters. Like, oh, I had that spell. Or even just leveling up characters in general. You always, like, especially as a newer player, you forget you have certain things. And you're just like, oh, man, why didn't I use that? So it's definitely something that that can change as as you play more and more. You can always find yourself leaning more to one side or the other, or staying that middle ground. So I mean, because it's very much a role playing game, and the middle of the ground is always a good option. Like I said, I'm pretty much in there, and as a veteran, I say veteran out of the group. Sam and I are second to Brandon, and Hannah and us are kind of on the same level. It's interesting you guys come in because it's very much the same thing where we see you, Chris, you role play well, and we see, and I sit next to you at the table, so I see you looking at that spell list, and you're just like. Yes. And we see you, Nancy, because this is where we see you do both pretty well. Like, because right now you're playing a character who has just been freed from slavery, and you are just experiencing life.
Yeah.
And then when you're in combat, we see you get excited about some of these spells that you can cast.
Right.
You're like, I do this, and we're like, oh snap, she's not playing around no more. And it's exciting to see that kind of like fun and that new joyous, because again, you guys are still so new. I know, especially you, Nancy, you're very fresh faced coming into this, and that's never a bad thing. We actually hope that you continue to do this and you just stick around for a while.
Yeah, so when I was going through my list, it's funny because when we went through the combat here, it was both a good thing and a bad thing that I discovered Everard's black tentacles. Because when I heard it, I was like, oh cool, tentacles are up from the ground and can kill a person. But then I experienced it. And I was like, I love it. It's
And
my favorite
this
thing
is definitely where you'll see different DMing styles. And you've seen this, Chris, because you've had both Sam and Brandon DM for you. Brandon will go into a lot of these things and be very descriptive in combat, where I'll be like, okay, he's like, okay, that hits. So you see Sorn pull out his hammer, bash him in his chest, and his armor dents in. You see him groan, and he goes really descriptive. So when you do something like the tentacles, and you're like, I do this, and Brandon's like, well, I gotta describe this now. Tentacles are up from the ground, grab him around his throat, and then you're like, okay, censored, all right. Versus someone maybe like Sam, she's a wonderful DM, she's a wonderful storyteller. She might not go as descriptive in certain things that Brandon, because that's just different things in DMing. And Sam is, she'll say that she's a very new DM and she's still learning, but she's still finding her style. And again, neither one of them is bad at what they do. I wholeheartedly believe that both are wonderful DMs, and I'm glad to play with them. So some of it's very like you'll get different experiences with different DMs, and you'll experience this at one point when probably a one shot with Sam, because Sam is very happy to do one shots for us occasionally. And now that you're more involved with this, you're more likely to get thrown into one of these. I fear what you're going to do as an evil character. If Sam does another evil campaign, oh no! And so that's going to kind of bring me to my last point here, because we could go on for hours talking about D&D and your new experiences. And I'm sure we'll even do another episode. Like, we'll check in, New Player Perspective Part 2, where are they now? Yeah. So my last question is knowing the knowledge that you have of D&D now, I guess it's two more last questions. One is, with the knowledge that you've gained, is there a character, like a race or a class or a subclass that you would like to experiment with in another campaign, a one-shot, or even an alignment if you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
I want a bard. I want to be a dude. I don't remember what else I can be. But I know that is the one thing I want to do.
You want to be a male bard that does something important. Let me guess. Do you want to do that stereotypical flirting and seducing everyone?
Yes. That was the one thing that caught me when I was looking at some memes and things about
D&D. Yes, there are the stereotypes.
You're going for everything. I started mainly joining, and I'm going to put it amongst the list of the whole role-playing part. It was the dice. I love the dice that people make. So because you start going into the whole thing. So when I was looking at the memes, and I'm looking at the different characters and how they interact, the one that struck me the best out of them all was the bard.
Yes.
I'm like, I want to be that. I can't in real life, but I want to be that. If I'm to role play something, I want to be that.
So yeah, plenty of choices as far as races go. Something charisma based, like such as a tiefling. And Aasimar is also charisma based. There's a couple other ones that will have bonus. Even a human, you can get a bonus to that as well. So you want to play a male bard that seduces everyone to solve all your problems.
Yes.
Your knowledge, Chris, as you've gained, are there things that a race or a class or something that you've learned about that you would like to experiment with in the future?
That's interesting. Yeah. I think I would love to I would love to do something that's not human, like not even human-like. I've with the few characters that I have played, except for Sarkikos, they've been mostly human in appearance, at least. And so I would love to do something like a Dragonborn. Yeah, I would love to be a Dragonborn, maybe a Dragonborn fighter.
That'd be a good choice.
It would be a nice breath of fresh air from all the spell casting.
And a little bit of the simplicity of just, which is why I was always drawn to Barbarian. It was just point and hit.
Yep.
It's like, what are we fighting? That. I'll go hit it. Bah! You want me to do anything else? Hit it again. Bah! All right, cool, I'm done.
As simple as that. You made me angry.
Yeah, exactly. And that is just because of my mindset, much like you guys. Those spells are so daunting to me that I actively avoid them. So, and I agree with you on a lot of that as well, because I've actively, with all the characters I've made, I've actually avoided humans. Because much as you talked about, Nancy, it's a fantasy. You get to be something else. It's escape of reality, and that was one of the big draws. I was like, I'm refusing to make a human, and then I made a human. But then of course, with me, I made it so it was a luchador kind of character, so it was a very specific, niche in my, my interest and stuff. So, but yeah, I started off with a Goliath. In Mythos and Mayhem, I'm playing a rock elemental. In Sam's other campaign that we started that's been on a little bit of a hiatus, I played a bugbear. It's like, I am playing other things than humans. Granted, they're usually very big people.
Yes.
I don't like short characters. Make me self-conscious. So this just leaves me with that last question. Do you guys think that you'll continue playing D&D?
Yes.
Nope, I'm out.
Okay, fair enough.
No, absolutely. I love it.
Good. So then that will bring us to the next episode. In the future, we'll do new player perspective. Where are they now? And we'll check in on your guys' journey. Because I think this is something that, again, we will always be able to talk about as you guys continue to learn. Because not only are we learning, you guys are also learning. We're just different levels, and we'll interact at some point. So until we see you guys next time, D10tion dismissed.